All right, welcome back, everybody. Folks, I've told you a little bit about Mike, and Mike, I hope I embarrass you, but I consider myself pretty good at packet hitters. I know all them there 20 bytes of fields, but when you get to coding stuff, and I met Mike, it was around 2010 or something at Secure Ninja, somewhere around there.
I have somewhere
And
in
I,
that ballpark.
And I was just like so intimidated when I just heard you talking. I was like, well, I can help you carry your bag. So I awesome stuff. But he's done like real pen tests. I was teaching CEH. I felt like a fraud. I'd never done a pen test in my life. Well, actually, I did one, but whatever. But Mike's the real deal. So I appreciate you making the time. He didn't have time to prepare anything. But what do you got, Mike? Tell us what you're doing these days.
Well, I mean, I have a couple of companies, Measured Risk and Mad Security. But as far as like, work-wise, just the usuals, doing pen tests and incident response and stuff like that. But so what I wanted to do, I guess, Larry asked me to talk about malware reverse engineering. Can you hear me all right, by the way?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to show just a couple of things about malware in general. So this VM here is just a Windows 7 VM, I think it is. I use this one whenever you're testing malware, especially in a VM. You always want to make sure that you're not using one of the more modern versions of Windows, because they have data execution prevention, things like that that'll maybe restrict what the malware wants to do. And since your job in reverse engineering malware is that you want to try to figure out what they're doing, then it's important that you're actually looking at it in its sort of native environment kind of thing, right? It's like looking at a lion in the zoo versus going to the Serengeti and watching a lion hunt. It's a completely different thing. So you want to make sure that you give it kind of free range to do what you want to do. But this Trojan horse, so I want to demonstrate, first of all, what a lot of people, when we talk about malware, first of all, a lot of people use the term virus to kind of refer to everything. A virus is specifically something that self-replicates but doesn't actually propagate, can't move itself from one machine to another, but it can make copies of itself on that same machine. A worm would be a self-replicating, self-propagating piece of malicious code, which actually can move itself from one machine to another, usually by exploiting a vulnerability on that target machine. And then Trojan horses are sort of the last category of viruses, malware in general. I mean, we got other things like adware, and we have things like ransomware and those things, but I think those are fairly self-explanatory. But the Trojan horse obviously comes from the idea of the Greek and Trojan War, right? And everybody's trying to kill themselves over the love of a single woman, Helen of Troy. But the idea goes that we basically package up the malicious code with the code that people want. So this particular Trojan horse was actually used by a 19-year-old kid who was trying to be a day trader. So he thought he was selling stocks online, was going to make a lot of money. He ended up getting himself in a lot of debt, about $90,000 worth, right? And he basically downloaded a free stock tracking tool, and then he downloaded his Trojan horse. He didn't write it himself. It was just something that he found online and decided he was going to use. So he downloads his Trojan horse, and then he combines the two together, the stock tracking tool and Trojan horse server, and posts it on a forum for other day traders and says, hey, if anybody wants a new stock tracking tool, this one's really pretty cool and it's free. And a couple of people downloaded it. He used keylogger capability of this tool to basically grab their authentication credentials to their brokerage accounts. Then he signed into their brokerage accounts and then made buys of his bad stock and basically gave him back his money. And of course, those people woke up and next morning and looked at their brokerage account and saw there were 30 grand light. And they, called their brokerage and said, what happened to my money? And they were like, oh, you paid this kid. Because he didn't do any kind of trickery to hide where the money was going. He literally just bought the stock from his account, from their account, right? Or vice versa. But either way, the point is that he wasn't too bright. He got arrested. He did go to jail. But the Trojan horse is still here, and that's what we're showing. So this is actually the client side. So this is a side that the hacker would use in order to configure the Trojan horse. And all you really have to do is just hit build server, and it goes into, a nice Windows GUI. By the way, this isn't Corona that I'm making me call.
Oh, that's what you say. Without the detection kits, I don't know.
I
also been coughing, and I don't know if my wife and I, just reading it, we're both coughing and sneezing, and I keep doing my Sideshow Bob malware, SpongeBob malware memory made, and I point to you and I go, evil! Evil!
That's funny.
So from now on, when you cough, I'm saying that.
Okay.
Gamer!
There you go. You gotta have a little button like on the radio talk shows where they can just replay the sound effect, you know? And they go, "Deet, deet, 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 deet." Anyway. So what we see here is we have a direct connect and reverse connect. So direct connect obviously has the benefit that you can connect to the port from any IP, excuse me, from any IP address. But the problem with that is if they have a firewall or anything preventing it, then you won't be able to actually connect to it. So this one is reverse connection, calls out to the hacker. But in that particular case, you have the problem that you have to actually put in an IP address for it to connect outbound to. We have
So the phone home. So this point was you can't make the inbound connection because you're stateful firewalls. These are testable stuff, Mike. So if you don't mind me,
right? No, go ahead.
So that prevents that. So that's why it usually comes in the form of like a phishing attack where they click on it and it tries to phone home. But now you're saying we have to have the IP address of where it's going to phone home to.
Right, and that IP address might be in the clear in the actual binary, and we might be able to find it, and that's part of the reverse engineering. But it also might be obfuscated or encoded in another way. For example, one of the really common things, and I wrote a script to demonstrate this one, but one of the very common methods used to hide IP addresses in malware is to use a non-dotted decimal IP address, right? So when we normally think of an IP address, we always think of it as being a
8.8.8.8, and we just separate them in those quadrants.
Right, with the 4 octets, right? And so just setting up a box I can connect to really quick to show. But basically, what I wrote here is a script that does converts that. So like for that IP address here, I can create all these different variations of an IP address, and all these actually work as IP addresses, and I'll demonstrate in a second. But this is the standard format, the dotted decimal format that we always deal with.
Right. So if we just let's my students look at that, would you highlight that address, the 192.168, and then let's put this in perspective. So if you look at this as the least significant, most of the least significant numbers, 133 is a decimal number, but 116 is not. 116 is 8 bits later. That's actually 116 times 256. Plus 133, and then if you take all of that 168, that's times 65,000 something, and 192 is not 192. That's 192 times whatever X amount of million. So you multiply those out for us, and you can get the actual true value, and you can represent that binary and hex in a full,
And that's what I was going to show is that I can grab one of these IP addresses and I can come over to a browser. So let me open up,
which will translate it for us.
Well, it doesn't have to. That's just it. The browser at the application layer doesn't really care.
Oh, right.
An IP address. So if I put this in as the IP address that it can go to, it goes straight to this website, even though it's represented here as being a non-dotted decimal IP address. It also works for other things like Telnet and.
So that's got to be tricky. How do you do that? Like, it's easy for me to say, take this IP address and convert it, but how do you recognize something like this in a string of hex code?
Right, and that's the whole idea is that if a person's using something like regex to basically try to identify IP addresses in malware, right, because you can use a tool like strings, right? So strings basically, if we do this, for example, this is actually a server executable, right? It shows us the human readable strings in, a binary, right? So
that's readable.
Right, well, this is, right? So all of these right here are all functions that they're trying to call from various DLLs and libraries, right? And then, so that's, because this is actually an unpacked executable. The original.
What are we looking at right now? What is this? What tool are you using?
This is the strings of the beast server. So if I, here, I'll show you. If I grab the beast server from the one that I've already created previously, so this one right here.
And we're not just looking at hex. We're looking at something interpreting the hex. What is this? Is an ASCII format? Is this like extended ASCII of this?
It is. And then let me show you here. Let's find this here. Just put this into, download this fine. I'll just put it in here. So replace, come here, replace. All right. So if we do strings on a packed binary, so this binary that we're dealing with right now is just the beast server. So it's the thing that you would actually combine together and send out to your actual victim. So what we're looking at, this is the first, I usually call this like the first stage of reverse engineering, the level 1 reverse engineer. Is able to do this type of thing and basically figure out things just from the strings in the binary. But the idea here is if I go here to my downloads directory, and then I run strings on that server executable, then if I look at it when it's packed, so in this case, this one is packed, we only see, like, for example, we see the UPX headers. UPX is in the CEH slides or whatever, they always call it like a compressor or something like that. But the term is packer, and what it basically does is it takes the original malware and it compresses it just like a zip file would, and then it creates a new executable on top of it, and that becomes the data portion of the resulting executable. And the idea is that, first of all, it changes the signature, right? Because the signature of it,
Right.
using C-based antivirus, you make any modification, it no longer matches, right? So when you compress that original binary, it's
You do
no
it with
longer
some
detected
knots.
as.
You do it with some key or something.
Well, you don't have to, not in this case.
Okay.
But the problem with UPX is that it's open source. So whenever, you know, the antivirus companies see a file that starts off with a UPX header like this, they know to just, you know, decompress it using, as I said, the open source utility, and they'll just decompress it and see the strings. But if it was using a custom packer, like I wrote one called Greenblatt, but if you use a custom packer, then they don't have the signature for it, and then they wouldn't be able to figure that out, right?
Okay,
So
hold on. We're getting a question. I just want to make sure you understand. And he's using the name Integration Architect, so I forget. That's not Doug, whoever that is. All right. He says, how does the DNS know how to translate that? Well, remember, when you send that out on the wire, it's not going out in dotted decimal, or it's going out in ones and zeros.
or
So
more accurately, like positives and negatives.
they're going out with, some positive,
Electrical
negative, right?
signals, yeah.
Some radio waves. So they just see binary information. That it's all binary to them.
Right.
So yeah.
But either way, it doesn't matter. Your browser looks at that as an IP address and not as a host name that needs to be resolved.
Right.
So the browser never actually initiates a DNS query for that.
That's a good point too. There's another point. There's never a DNS anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, so when you see this, when you look at the packed executable, you see far fewer strings that you can actually read, right? It doesn't have that big.
So let me pause here. So what if I'm getting this right? If somebody compiles code, the code could contain ASCII information. It might not. It contains function stuff. Wait a minute. If I display that in ASCII, anything that was original ASCII will get revealed.
Right. Well, see, that's the thing is that with the way that this strings utility works is it basically looks for any two ASCII characters followed by a string terminator, which is a null. Unless we're talking about Unicode, then it's double null. But either way, that's what it's doing, is it's just matching those strings that it sees in there. And all executable files have to have at least this as readable strings. This is actually the imports table. This is Windows executable files are all in the same format. They're all in what's called a portable executable
You probably
format.
told me this 20 times today. It finally registered.
What's that?
That all compiled code will still have to have some ASCII readable text in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the signature itself, when you look at an executable, the PE signature is an MZ. It's the first two characters, first two bytes in the actual ASCII code, or the hex code. If you were to look at it in ASCII, you'd see it as an MZ as the first two characters in all PE files. And then you see the DOS stub, which was this thing up here.
Right. And I know that from like forensics, which Mike also does. Mike also is an incident handler, and it's like all file types. Like I remember PKZip always had a PK in front of it.
Yep. And I mean, all files have their signatures, right?
Right.
So
right.
JPEGs have them, and PNG files have them, and GIFs have them. And
that's how they find like mismatched file types. The guy would get his porn and rename it to .dll, and that stands out like a sore thumb.
Right. Well, or they hide them using steganography behind more innocent images, but whatever. But the point is that, so yeah, like the imports table in the PE file header. So as I was saying, the portable executable file format is for EXEs, COMs, DLLs, and sys files in Windows. So all of those use that same file format, and they all have a header. And the header basically has, what each of the sections are. All executables will have either a code or a text section, and then maybe a data section, also possibly a resource section. The resource section is this one right here, actually, is what it's labeled right there. But the resource section is where all the actual, so if you have any kind of prompts for the users, whether it's command line or whether it's a Windows tool, if it has any prompts, they'll all be stored in clear text in that resource section. And so that's where you see, like, one other CH question. There's one of the defacement Trojans, and they show a calculator app that says you've been defaced or whatever, and that's like the whole deal or whatever. It's just going into the resource section and making those modifications, and you can make them without even updating the checksum of the PE header, and it still actually runs. So you can basically modify strings and files whenever the hell you want to. But whenever you see an executable that doesn't have any real human readable strings outside of its imports table, then you assume that it's either been encrypted or packed, right? So those are the two things that basically happen to make that. And so, like I said, all we really have to do is just use the UPX utility and use that server, and then that decompresses it. And now if we run the same strings again on it, we see that there's a whole lot more. Now we see the actual code section, the data section, the additional data section, resource section, and then all these other human readable strings. Now, most of these are format strings used in, printf type functions or whatever. This is the imports header again. So this is the imports table for the actual malware now, not for the actual packer. So now we see that some of the things that it's trying to do, and a lot of these that they're showing here, for example, like process enumeration, this right here from a malware reverse engineering point of view is a usable piece of information that we can go and try to see, if we know that they're doing some sort of process enumeration, they're probably attempting to kill processes or maybe start additional processes or modify the privileges of processes and things of that nature, right? So starting there, that helps us to understand what this malware is wanting to do, right? And what it's trying to pull off. We also see that it has some mail functions. So these are SMTP commands to send email, right? So we know that it's trying to at least send email. This could be as the notification. It could also be as a way for it to exfil data, right? So it could actually do attachments and things like that to the email and then send those out. So we don't really know. That's another thing that we need to look into. We see registry keys, for example, here and here. We see things like, the Explorer process obviously being called or having it named at least. We got a couple more strings. We see ports and users and things of that nature. And additionally, but yeah, so the long and the short of it is just looking at the strings tells us quite a bit about the actual executable.
For some reason, I was picturing you dumping this in hex and that you had some tool. It is, but it's much simpler process than I thought.
There is a tool for Windows. I mean, there is actually, Microsoft has a free port of the strings utility to Windows, but strings is usually a default executable in most Linuxes. So, you can just go and do a strings and see what like I said, what type of registry keys, or maybe you can find directories that it might be trying to copy data into, right? Or you can find IP addresses that it's trying to connect outbound to. So just looking at this, and then we see this whole list of things here. Now, this is something that we really should pay attention to because this isn't part of the imports table. What we're seeing here is just a list of strings that are being stored by the actual binary. Then you have to wonder, well, why are all these strings look just like my imports table? And the reason for that is because this is using one of the least common methods of linking DLLs or linking content in programming. So normally most Windows executables use DLLs, which stand for dynamic loadable libraries, right? And it uses them to take the code that Microsoft or whatever, type of service that they're trying to conduct, right? Whoever that was, they basically say, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If I want to open up a network socket, I don't have to figure out how to make the actual interrupts work on the actual NIC card to make it say, open up a network port. I've got these libraries that I can call and say, this is what I want it to do, right?
Object-oriented development, which we're going to cover in the next module, guys. So what he's saying is very testable. Keep going.
Oh, okay. So, but the idea then is that if we, look at those, what they're trying to do, normally they would be linked in through that imports table. When the operating system, when the person double clicks on an executable, the operating system reads that header, allocates the memory that the program is asking for, right? And that's another thing that's useful, by the way, in understanding malware reverse engineering is how it actually does that. Because some of it's created in physical memory, the RAM, some of it's created in page files, and depending on whether or not they dynamically allocate memory, they can also be tracked in what's called a VAD tree. And so memory is kind of stored all over the place in Windows, and it's kind of piecemealed around, and it's due to the fact that Windows is always backwards compatible to every legacy version of Windows, right? So they kind of have to make things work.
All that legacy stuff. There's always going to be SIMnet bias, compatibility, something in there. This is a side thing that always puzzled me though, because of an issue I ran into. So I don't mean to sidetrack, but in an application, can I say this part of it can never be written to virtual memory? This I prefer is written to virtual memory.
It's harder to do with programming languages like using normal compilers. If you're using something like assembly, it's a whole lot easier to do that sort of thing because you can
because here's why I'm asking. This was weird. I had, and this was when whatever 4 gigs of 4 gigs of RAM was, let's say, was a lot. I think it was even before that, but let's say that was a lot. And I would get a Windows message. Oh, and I turned off virtual memory. I didn't want to use virtual memory.
Mhm.
And I turned off virtual memory, and I got an error. Open up Internet Explorer a couple of times, and it said, "You've run out of virtual memory. Your system is dangerously low." I said,
Right.
"Dangerously low?" I turned it off. I didn't want any. I didn't want to do
Right.
swap file. And someone, and I never validated. He said that because Microsoft hard coded one particular feature. How many windows do you have open? That's not considered a high performance issue. You can write that to whatever virtual memory. And if you tried turning off virtual memory, you could only have 4 windows open.
Oh, is
That
that
was
right?
what this guy claimed. I never validated that, but I was like, isn't that something? Because, yeah, that's why you can't actually turn off virtual memory on workstation. You can on a server, he said, but you can't do it on workstation. So I don't know.
Yeah, it might. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I mean, I've never really dealt with that issue, but the as far as like how it allocates, that's one of the things that I was about to mention was the other type of linking, right? So when you do the, like I said, dynamic linking, then you basically just call it through those headers and it loads it into memory. And it actually, it's one of the issues that a lot of people don't understand about how DLL hijacking works. But anyway, there's the thing called an IAT, which is the interrupt address table. And that basically is where Windows loads the DLLs and it says, this is the memory address where these DLLs are located, right? And so that's just standard dynamic linking. Now it's easy to hijack because you can hook that IAT table and then you can say, no, this function exists at this memory location, right? And then you'll be basically sort of man in the middling the DLL, right?
So when it
Because
tries to
then,
do whatever, call up thesaurus, you would actually call up, point thesaurus to a different location and maybe point
right.
that to the truth. Okay, cool.
Or you could do it like, for example, if they were making a network connection, you can always
WinSock.
instantiate, 2 network connections instead of 1, right? So it would look like the same trusted process was creating the network connection, but then you're piggybacking on that because you've hijacked their DLLs. So now your network connection looks like it's running the same process memory space as the trusted connection, right? So there's all kinds of different things. You could just be as creative as you want to at that level, right? But the idea is that, when you do things in the actual, when you do them in the actual imports table, you end up exposing a lot, because a lot of the more simple versions of what they call behavioral detection, they'll just look at the imports table and they go, oh, if they have, any of these process enumerating functions, or if they have any of these, token manipulator functions or anything like that, they'll score that really heavy and they'll go, oh, definitely malware, right? So a lot of people won't use dynamic linking for that reason, because it basically exposes a lot of their possible functionality. So then you move to the idea of static linking, which most Linux executables are statically linked, but very few Windows ones are. And the idea there is that you basically would copy, the compiler basically copy and paste the code from the DLL that's used in your code and paste it into the compiled code. The issue with that from a reverse engineering perspective is that it's very difficult to determine what is authored code and what is DLL code, right? So we have to walk through more of the functions. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let me just show, this might give you a better example of what I'm saying. So this is actually this is an IDA disassembly of the packed server. I want to show this one just because, again, it just demonstrates another way that you can identify whether or not a piece of code has been modified, right? So again, IDA completely removed all of those funky strings that we saw when we ran the packed executable through strings before. IDA has already removed them all. That's why there are no strings in the actual strings window. But if we go up here to the imports table, that's where we saw those import table functions before, right? So these are the actual libraries they're calling.
So it knew how to sort that out. It was able to interpret. It's got like AIs itself or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what this, I mean, IDA is obviously, I believe it's named after Ida Lovelace, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But you used to tell a story about Ida Lovelace, didn't you?
No, who's I don't even know who that is.
She's literally the first person to ever write computer code, and it was a woman. And it's funny because like women don't like technology and they think it's geeky or whatever, and you're just like, what are you talking about? The first person to ever write computer code was Ida Lovelace.
Yeah, I like to talk about Rosalind. I forget her name, but she was one of the 3 people who discovered DNA. But being a woman, she didn't get credit.
Right.
Francis Crick and James Watson got the Nobel Prize, but Rosamund, I forget what they said, but she didn't get any credit. She didn't get it, nothing. Yeah. And she's the one who discovered the double helix.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. But anyway, but my point is that's where this comes from. But when we look at this disassembly of this, I mean, and by the way, a lot of people get intimidated by assembly code. and it is intimidating if you're actually trying to write it, but reading it is actually very simple, right? When you look at this code, we see, for example, this one's just defining a variable, this one's pushing a register, EAX register. Now we could go and talk about what each of the registers do, but that's a whole different class, go through. But basically, then this one is doing a move, so it's basically like doing a copy or a mem copy or something like that. And so this is the source, that's the destination, so it's moving that value into that register, right? And then this one's just doing an add function. And then here is a NOP, which literally just means like to do nothing, just spin a cycle. But the long and the short is what this is showing is it's a very small disassembly for a program, right? Because
Mike, pause on that NOP for a second, because you would know as well as anybody. They might see something about writing a bunch of those in a row.
Right, the NOP sled, right?
The NOP sled, yeah. That might show up in the near future.
Yeah, the NOP sled or NOP slide is the idea that when people are doing a buffer overflow, when they're obviously the shell code, the thing that's actually going to do what they want it to do, the payload, it is very small. It only has to open a shell or download something else, or find other things to infect. It's usually a very small piece of code, so that's not going to overflow the buffer. Now you could use junk to overflow the buffer. You could just throw in a bunch of A's, but A's get translated to hex, which gets translated to binary, and they would look at a bunch of 41s, which is the hex value for a capital A, and you could throw that in there, and it would go, okay, what do I do with that, right? It doesn't know how to process that. So the idea of throwing in NOPs to fill up your buffer so that you can actually exploit the buffer and overflow the buffer, right? Then you can use the NOPs, because no matter where it calls back into that sled, it'll see a NOP and just go, okay, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, and just keep doing a bunch of nothing until it hits your payload code, which would then execute. So that's the idea of a NOP sled. And if you'd see it in hex, it would be a hex 90 value.
Can you slide up so that you can see the actual command? Just scroll up. It's just NOP. There. Yeah, it's a NOP sled is typically how they describe it.
So
it's used in buffer overflows to overwrite an instruction pointer, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I might have a slide that shows that thing, but I don't know. But I mean, yeah, if you want like a 30-second crash course on buffer overflows, I think I have a slide somewhere that might.
Whatever you feel like showing, I'm thinking it's going to be very useful to them, no matter what. Yeah.
Let's see. I know I have a malware slide. Let's see.
Guys, feel free to ask the questions of this guy.
Yes,
nobody knows. In my experience, in my limited experience anyway, I don't have anybody that has the app level stuff like Mike.
By the way, Larry, I have pitched this entire course, and EC Council even branded it for me to EC Council, and I've been delivering it as a one-day course, even though it was originally developed as a 4-day course. But I'm trying to get them to do it as a certification, because I think it would be really cool to have authored an EC Council cert, right?
Well, you are welcome to test it out with my students or market it through me or something. I'm a huge fan of yours. I think you know that.
Well, cool. Thanks, man. But yeah, that's what this is here, is because I've done a couple of workshops for them, but I wanted to show you a quick little, let me find the section I wanted to show you on stack stuff for buffer overflow. Actually, that's a good slide. That one shows what I was talking about with the DLL hijacking, except it has this random red line flowing through here for some reason. I think it's because on annotate, I think delete all drawings. There we go. Put it off of there. All right. So, but basically, I'll go away, zoom. So basically, this one shows the that process of DLL hijacking I was talking about. So,
Mike, I'm sorry. The other guys were creating slides, and some shared them. Are you willing to share these with my students?
Yeah, I can give them.
Awesome. So he'll mail them to me, and I'll put them in the directory. So if you maintain your folder there, I'll get them.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. So, but this is the like the visual of that, right, that I was talking about before. So this is where the actual code would say call this function, and then it would go to the function pointer table, which would go to that IET table is what that actually is called. That's why it's IET hooking. But it basically says this is the memory location where you should call that, and then it would jump over to that memory location in a normal process, right? But then with the attacker code, it would do that man in the middle, so it would actually call the attack code, which, like I said, could do almost anything, and then it would call down to the internet connect or whatever. But let me see.
And IAT is internet attack.
Interrupt address table.
Interrupt address table. I see. Okay.
And of course, about the rings of security.
Yeah. We know that nobody uses one or two.
Well, this is my favorite. You can use this one, by the way, because this describes basically rings 0 and 3, and where the processes that actually are hosted in Windows go. Right, and it
Yeah.
shows. So then it
Yeah.
goes through and it shows how the applications use the APIs to talk to the executive, which talks to the other pieces, and then back through. So, but anyway, I got a lot of stuff in there that you can use. But oh, here's the stack. No, that's still paging. We were just talking about paging though. Okay, here's the stack. So when most people think of the stack, they think of it as like one big thing. There's actually stack frames. So each time a function is called, the sub function actually gets its own stack frame, right? And there's a thing that's called a function preamble that you can always look for. I have that in another slide, but function preamble that you can always look for, which is basically where you'll see a push of the EBP, and then you'll see a move of the ESP to the EBP. And that always sets up a new function because it's setting up a new stack frame. Now, as far as who's responsible for that, that depends on, you know, different calling conventions, which compiler you use, whether you use Visual Studio or Borland or GCC or whatever to compile it, right? Might make different choices. Like, for example, if you were to, some of them will make the actual caller destroy the resulting stack frame, and some will make the actual called function destroy the actual stack frame.
I'm
So
sorry, and the acronym ESP is
this is the base pointer, and this is stack pointer.
stack
The
pointer. Okay, execute.
Yeah, well, no, it actually stands for extended. So in 16-bit processors, you just had an SP and a BP. And then in 32-bit processors, they put the E designator in there for the extended memory management model, and basically saying it went to 32 bits. And now with 64-bit processors, there's actually an R in front of them. So you'll actually see an RSP and an RBP. So, but base pointer and stack pointer is the only thing you really need to know about it.
Okay,
but,
great.
Yeah. But the idea here is that with the base pointer points to obviously the bottom of the call stack, the new stack frame, and the stack pointer points to the very top of it, right? And there is most references to any data within the stack itself is referenced off of the base pointer because it's static; it doesn't move. But there is a compiler convention which actually is called frame pointer omission that actually frees the base pointer to be used as a general use register. And when you do that, you have to call all your memory locations reference from your stack pointer, which is a moving reference. So it makes it a little bit harder to kind of track the functions and the variables that are being passed when you're actually doing the reverse engineering. So it's not something that's done normally, but it is done a lot by malware authors. So if you're going to be using malware, and there is another slide on that too in here if people want to go through there, but basically the idea is, and I'll show you, is the idea that there's a push operation which basically puts data onto the stack. And I'm gonna move this window. I don't know if it grays out for people, so I'm trying to move it over. I can't. We're gonna close this stupid video window. Stupid. Does this create a gray box wherever this window is, or does it show?
No, we're seeing fine. I see.
Oh, okay. Because I had this like video window of you and me up here, and I'm like, I keep seeing it, and I'm thinking it's gonna gray out the slide.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So, but the idea here is that whenever you do, so the stack is what's called last in, first out, right? Which basically means, I always use the visual like
Stacking
idea
dishes.
like when you go to a buffet, like a Chinese buffet, and they have that plate dispenser at the end of the table or whatever, and you go in and the dishwasher pushes all those plates down that little dispenser, right? And the last plate that goes in is the first plate you take off, right? So that's how I always think of it, because it kind of even looks like you'd be looking down the tube, and these are all.
I kind of remember learning that 30, 40 years ago. They used the same analogy.
Yeah, right. But so the idea here is whenever we do a push operation, whenever we push data onto the stack, we basically increase the stack pointer by 4 and then put that data on the top. And that's why I was saying, if you're trying to track it based on the stack pointer, if there's...
It depends on how much is in there.
Right, how many operations have taken place in between the last time you looked at that function. So normally we can just kind of jump from one function to the called function in the actual assembly code, and we can go, okay, so that's still going to be, BBP -4 or whatever, right? And we'd say that that's where that function or that variable is, and then we'll just check down here in this other function and see what they're using that variable for. But now if they did frame pointer omission, now you have to go, okay, I got to look at all the code in between that may have been called to see if there was any additional push or pop operations or even direct memory operations where they just go in and actually just subtract 4 bytes from the stack pointer or whatever, right? So now you got to read all of that stuff before you go to the function to see what it actually did, so that you can track the variable. That's what I'm saying. Frame pointer omission is something that hackers do to make it more difficult for you to be able to
obfuscate
Yeah.
signature or whatever.
And then the pop operation would be the next, which of course just takes 4 bytes off, right? So it basically takes 4 bytes off and it pops off that data into whatever register, that you told it to, right? And so then it stores the value. So you pop off and it says it would, take the data off the top of the stack and then basically store it in the EAX register. Now, the EAX register isn't always a great register, by the way, to use to push and pop, but because it's also the general use register that stores the return of a call function. So you also have to make sure it's more if you're reading code than writing code, so it's not really that big a deal. But yeah, this is just showing format strings. The cool thing so obviously you guys are familiar with the idea of format strings, right? The idea that you can have.
Now, we're managers. What are you talking about? My guys are they're they're high level guys. They want to know how much it costs, how long is it going to take?
Well, that depends on who you hire. And
yeah. I had an engineer years ago. He said, he's a Russian guy. He goes, when people ask me how long will it take, I tell them 2 to 2. Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months, maybe 2 minutes. It depends. And he said, salespeople hate me. They never bring me on pre-sale calls.
I like an Irishman to say it, but say T. I always think it's funny how Irish people say 3.
My Irish accent to Irish people sounds like a Chicago cop. You've seen too many Lucky Charms commercials.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all have that. Old Flanagan.
Hey, we think they all talk like this then.
Yarr.
Like the cop from
like
Bugs
pirates.
Bunny.
They always sound like pirates.
Pirates.
Yeah. Anyway, but I was just gonna. There's. I can't kill this.
Evil. Monday morning, I was coughing like that on the intro slide. It's like it's the beginning, and that's I put the video out there anyway. I'm recording this. I will put this up to YouTube. I hope you don't mind.
I don't care. I've already done a lot of this stuff on internet anyway, so it doesn't bother me. But yeah,
I noticed Secure Ninja took down your video. It was, what are they, jealous? You had the #1 video up there. You did that Wi-Fi hacking thing. It was crushing everything, and they took it off. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what are you gonna do? I've tried to talk to Shaquille, a couple of times. Well,
we're recording. Be careful.
Well, I'm just saying that, he's just same old guy. He hasn't changed anything. So, YouTube did ban hacking. That's true. But so this is that preamble code I was talking about, by the way. So there's that push of the EBP and the move of the ESP to the EBP. Oh, and that's I'm sort of spacing out. But that's what I was going to show you here is the idea that that's what we're seeing is that this is the calling function. This is its local space. And then these are the variables that it's passing to the function it's calling. This is a return address, also called the instruction pointer, which is what you mentioned earlier when you're doing a buffer overflow. This is what you want to overwrite, right? And then this is that old BBP that we just saw being pushed. And then they took the stack pointer, which would have been the very top of this calling stack. They then copied that into the base pointer. So now it became the bottom of the called stack. And then the stack pointer gets put to the top of this. And so when we're referencing things from here, because memory addresses, this actually goes from a high memory address down to a low memory address. We always sort of reference it in this direction, though.
Actually, it's funny. Where's the low memory? The low memory is at the bottom.
The low memory is at the bottom.
I know you know the paper. Smashing the stack for fun and profit. He counts up. So the top part is where he puts the low memory address.
Like I said, it just shows because some people will show it flipped over. They'll flip the stack over.
Yeah, it's like Wireshark. In Wireshark, why am I see the frame at the top? It should be the layer 2 address should be at the bottom, then the IP, then the.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. They should reference it that way. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, because most people are most interested when they're looking at Wireshark anyway. Are usually interested at the application layer. So why not put it at the top? Right.
Well, maybe people like you. I'm just looking at network stuff. I can't read all that app stuff.
Well, yeah. Anyway, but the idea here is that whenever you would push in new, let's say, for example, you defined a variable, right? So you would push that onto the stack, and then the variable would be called here in this local space. And the idea would be that if a buffer overflow, right? So if you put a variable in here and the buffer was overflowed, it would write down over to here, and then it would hopefully overwrite the return address. If it doesn't overwrite the return address, you can still do the buffer overflow, still crash the process as a type of a DOS. But if you're trying to get the buffer to actually execute, then you need to be able to control the return address, because the return address is basically like a go-to statement.
Right.
Basically, hey, after you're done with doing whatever you're going to do over here, this is where
run my malicious code.
Right. So, but I want my code to either be in this address, or I want to be able to control this address to point it back to my code in the stack and have it run over here, right? And so that's the idea of what the buffer overflow is, and trying to do that. And like I said, it went a little longer than 30 seconds that I promised, but I think it's
That's okay. That's okay. We still got some time. I'd like to go another like 10 minutes if you don't mind, and then leave some stuff for questions.
Okay.
YouTube banned hacking? What do you mean? YouTube? No, I think you could still look up, like, I bet you if you go to YouTube right now, you could probably go to Poison Ivy tutorial, and they'll show you how to do it.
Let's do it. Well, I'm going to go back to Beast, and we'll do a Beast tutorial real quick. How about that? So, but this is the idea that, so like I said, the kid gets this, he does the injection, and that's how we got into that, was the whole thing about process memory injection. All
Yeah,
that
what
kind of
hack
stuff.
was that again? I missed the beginning. I was answering a text. What?
Oh, this was a kid whose 19-year-old kid was trying to buy and sell stocks online, and
Right, I caught that. He didn't obfuscate where his bank
Yeah.
account was. But
No.
what was there a famous name for this hack? What did he?
No, I don't think he ever got
Oh, okay.
like famous or anything. He wasn't, because this wasn't really a hack, right? I mean, it's the idea that he downloaded somebody else's Trojan horse. You know, if he wrote the Trojan horse, maybe he would have ended up being a famous hacker type person.
Right.
You know,
But he was a script kiddie.
Yeah, he was just, well, most of the famous ones are, by the way. You know, when you look at people like Mafia Boy, or like Adrian Lamos, the homeless hacker, right? You look at those guys. Now it's sort of, I don't want to speak ill of the dead. Adrian Lamos is dead, but those guys aren't, they didn't write their tools. They basically just use somebody else's discovered vulnerability. And
There was a Citibank hack last year. A woman did something similar, right? Remember that there was a Citibank hack, and she did really stupid stuff. She left all kinds of signatures. They caught her very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that a lot of people, especially when those NSA tools were leaked and Eternal Blue and stuff like that, a lot of people downloaded those things and then went to something like Shodan, looked up port 445 with Windows 7, found thousands, probably if not millions, of hosts that they could use, and probably just started attacking each of them, or dumping the entire list into Metasploit and running the Eternal Blue exploit directly from Metasploit, and getting themselves in trouble. But unless there's some sort of a public reason to announce it, I don't think law enforcement it doesn't behoove them in any way to do so. So because you start telling people, oh yeah, they just use these tools from the NSA, then you get a bunch of people that are like, oh, I can do it too, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of copycats. So
I had a buddy of mine. It was pretty funny. It's my drummer's older brother, who was like the head of the sheet metal union in Philly. He's a big, tough guy. He looks like Dwayne Johnson, and he's known me since I was a little kid. So he thinks he's my big brother. I have to shut up when he's talking. And he goes, "Hey, Green, let me ask you something. You ever hear about that? When you put your ATM card in a reader, they got like a double reader there. They can see you. Yeah, it's called skipping. Let me finish." So he goes in, but they need the phone number, right? I mean, they need your PIN. So they put cameras up, and you'll be at the gas station. They copy your card, but then they get a camera, and they can copy your card, steal all your money. You ever hear that? And I said, yes. It's called skimming. He goes, skimming. That's what they called it. Hey, you think you could set that up? Mike, that's not what I do. That's not what I do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not that difficult either. You can buy the mag reader on the internet for like $30. So, anywho's, and 3D printing and all that makes it nice and easy.
In theory, you might know these things.
In theory, yeah.
Mike's a pen tester, and he has to get past a lot. He does red team stuff. I'm sure he's got.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of the tools. I mean, just like any tool, right? I mean, a hammer can be used to build a house. It can also be used to cave somebody's skull in. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But anyway, so the rest of this, like I said, just going through the configuration, is like this uses the services host process as the name for it, SVC host. And the reason is because Microsoft uses the services host process as a legitimate process, right? And if the user even thought that was a dangerous process and they went out and Googled it, it would actually show it as a valid process, right? Google comes back and goes, yep, there's a little Wikipedia entry on the side and everything. And it says, yeah, it's a valid process used by Windows to start and manage a bunch of different processes, right? So it's a really good one to use to call your malware, because the average user wouldn't know the difference, right? And I'll show you once we actually start this, I'll show you what it actually looks like. But then we go into notifications. So this basically is this is where we'd hard code that IP address, basically telling it where to connect out to. Then we got email notification, ICQ notification, or CGI notification. ICQ, by the way, for those that are a bit younger, is this old school chatting tool. You know, think like Kick or Snapchat or something like that. And even that's
I
probably
seek you. Get it? I seek you. But people
right.
were doing that to remote control. I remember I followed up at a site. One of the things I had to do was follow up after they had terminated a less than professional network admin, and he was using ICQ to get in. I had to remove ICQ from a lot of workstations. So
Yeah.
was that a backdoor as well?
Well, you could cause ICQ to actually execute code. And so you could basically use it as almost like a proxy or remote control tool.
Yeah.
But then we've got startup. So normally we would see startup locations, and we can actually see them here because we're on a Windows computer. So you can go here to just do msconfig. And if you go to msconfig, whoa, that wasn't what I wanted. How did that pop up?
Display.
Config. Don't you wish, like, I know you're a Trekkie, right? And don't you wish, like, that you could still, like, I mean, you can do it somewhat with, like, Siri and Google and that stuff, but, like, where you could just say, computer, open up system configuration, right? And it would just do it.
You can. Actually,
you can't. You can't, because whenever I try anyway, it never gets anything right. Like, especially with my wife's last name.
That's
right?
the problem.
My wife, right? She's Vietnamese, right? Her last name is Nguyen, Nguyen. But I have to say Nguyen to get anything to understand what the hell I'm saying. Like, if I try to even ask Google to call her or whatever, if I ask, you know, and she's in my phone,
my youngest daughter has a Chinese name, and it's Eileen, but it's spelled like Aileen, the Irish. And so when I call it, it's always Aileen. Tom is Tom Oop the Groovy.
That's my point. Yeah, you've got to learn to speak their language. They're not learning to speak ours. You know what I mean? But anyway, but in here it's got the start applications, and this is the normal start applications where, you know, legitimate applications would say to restart once the OS is, you know, rebooted, right? So these are the services and other programs that you want to restart will be started here in the HKey local machine software Microsoft Windows current version run. There's also a run once if you only want it to start the very next time that you restart the system. There's a run service and a run service once, and there's a bunch of these in here, but these are where, like, legitimate tools would start from. Well, if you look here at the hacker tool, they first of all use an ActiveX control, which is kind of genius, because you can have an ActiveX control load in Explorer, not just Internet Explorer. So this Explorer, the file Explorer, the thing that makes your window show up on here, right? The thing that gives you your desktop is also Explorer. So having it start up as an ActiveX control with Explorer gives it incredible permissions, right? Because it's basically running as the system now. But then it also can run as a comm service. This is basically a list of processes that it wants to kill when it initially launches on a machine. Most of these, of course, are some sort of, you know, antivirus or, you know, anti-malware, firewall process or whatever. But you can put in any other process that you want in here. And then you can also say to kill it on intervals. So you can say 5 seconds is the default. Disable the XP firewall. Right.
So it's constantly turning on somewhere, and it'll just keep turning it off.
Right.
Someone made a note. He noticed you have Cain up there. He said, that's what got him into this career. I remember when that was like the most evil tool ever. And all kinds of hacks. It was a sniffer. It had a Cisco hacks and stuff.
I can show you how Cain and Abel works too, if you want me to. How much time do we have?
You got like 10 more minutes.
All right. So let me just show you. So I'll show you real quick. This is the B server, like when you connect to it or whatever. But I was just going to show you that I did that. I put Notepad in here as one of the processes to kill. So you'll see that now that this B server is connected, it should kill it every time I start it. It'll just keep killing it, right? Because it's I just put it as a process. So that's how it does. It just runs and it just keeps.
And you could be doing that to the anti-malware or whatever.
Right, or just maybe the better idea would just be to do it to the update process. Because if you landed on the machine, right, then obviously it didn't get detected by whatever antivirus they had running on there, right? But if you kill their antivirus process, especially if they're that type of person that looks down to see the little shield or the little K or whatever it is.
You kill the update so it can't get new signatures. It can't get Windows patches.
Yeah, because if you kill the actual process, then they'll see that.
Sure,
but if you kill the update every time it starts, then they never get it.
That's funny.
So, but anyway. But this is, I'll just kind of, well, we can either one or the other. Actually, Cain might actually be a little bit more interesting for you guys because we can actually run my Kali box and then we can show you what you actually sniff in Cain and Abel when Cain and Abel runs, what you actually see in Wireshark for it. It's kind of interesting, actually, because you'll see it doing all the ARP poisoning. You'll see it collecting the information first, which is kind of cool. And then you'll see it actually doing the ARP poisoning. And then once we quit it, you'll actually see it fix everything up again, which is kind of neat.
Now, is it ARP poisoning, but it also poisons switches, right? Can't you poison a switch with this? You could do like,
yeah, you can. Yeah, so ARP poisoning. So we'll see it actually doing both ways. So we'll see it actually doing it'll actually poison the ARP cache on the router side or switch side, and it poisons the individual host. So it becomes a man in the middle by poisoning both of their ARP caches. That way, they both think. So the
that's on a router. That's on a router to a host. That's an ARP. I get a little. I thought you could also do like port flooding, which isn't an ARP cache. A lot of people get like the CAM table confused with an ARP.
Cain
I thought CAM could do that. Okay, never mind.
Cain does.
Or just ARP caching.
Yeah, ARP poisoning,
or
cache poisoning, or whatever you want to call it. But let's see. So we'll start running Wireshark here. Don't need these captures up here, but there we go. Capture 7. Hold on, my interface.
Like dsniff would do that. What tool would you use for against your switches? Do you do any of that today? Do you?
Dsniff's old school. That's Doug Song wrote that back in like somewhere in the 90s.
That was the first time I ever heard about those port flooding, the switch attack.
Yeah, he wrote a tool in that same suite, that whole
Ettercap
tools. Yeah, he wrote one called Mac Off, and that one does the Mac flooding.
Mac Off.
Yeah, Doug Song's still in the game. He's still kicking. I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but he wrote all that stuff when he was like.
Oh, by the way, you were the one who told me about how malware, when it knows it's being like FireEye or something, they VM it and they try to do some detonation. And you told me, well, then they test, to see if they're internet connected before they do it. One of the guys here was telling me that with a C command, you can actually check the temperature of a machine, and you can't do that in a VM. So that would be one of the checks.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that they can look for. They can look for registry keys in VMs that tell them that they're running in VMware. The what is it? The OIU or whatever, the vendor identifier.
Yeah, OUI, organizationally unique identifier. OUI,
yeah, that one. But those things there, they can just look at that and they're all VMware, right? If you were to go and look up any ones that are on an actual
right,
VMware,
the default ones, yeah,
right.
People edit those,
Yeah, so exactly. If you're going to be doing malware, you want to make sure that you kind of remove any of those, obvious things that would identify your machine being VMware. But
the temperature one was new on me. That was pretty cool. But the MAC address I knew. Yeah.
Yeah, but doing things like there's another function call that's a Windows API that says, is a debugger attached? Right, so it literally just says, "Hey, if I'm being debugged, I can act completely differently."
Wow! So they can even tell that, huh?
Yeah, because it's a flag that's set in the kernel when you do kernel level debugging. It's a flag that's set in the kernel, and they can basically just say, "Hey, on this process ID, is that flag set?" And if they see that flag set, then they go, "Nope, behave differently. Do something nice. Print out flowers or something." Like this. That's so they just act differently when they're know that.
And we said that overall, when somebody knows they're being detected, they will be deterred. Right. If you know you're on camera, you act different than when you do if you're not on camera. If you know they're logging keystrokes, right? Whenever there's a detective control.
Well, unless you're just crazy or inebriated.
And then he commits the crime in broad daylight. He didn't even have the decency.
On Netflix, they have a series. It's called like Caught on CCTV or Caught on TV or something like that. But it's all in the UK. And it's all these like
dopey criminals
things that are caught on camera. No, I mean there's some fights, and it's crazy because you see this guy like you'd find this fascinating. But there's this one fight where this guy gets knocked down, and this guy just starts literally punting his head, like just kicking him like a soccer ball, right? And then they tell you at the end of it that you see the cops show up and arrest everybody or whatever, right? And you see at the end of it, they tell you what the sentence the guy got. He got like 30 days of like probation or something. And
my God.
That was crazy. And you're like, if that had happened in America, that guy would be in prison for the next 20 years. But in the UK, you punt the guy's head like a football, and it's like, hey, 30 days,
All right then. Settle down.
Right. It's just funny. Anyway, I think, does anybody have any other questions, by the way? Because I know that my time's running short.
Yeah, we're running. Tom Up the Grove is here, and he said
Yeah, I
still
see.
using Bad Store. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, it's the best, man. I love that, right? I mean, the
I still
bad
have a
store.
copy. I still have it, and I got it from you. You're the one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's on Vulnhub too. So if anyone wanted to download it, they could just get it off Vulnhub.
And
But
it's a VM or whatever. It's a machine you can load as a
yeah,
VM,
it's just a VM. Yeah, it's
and
isolated.
it's got vulnerabilities for just about every major attack, right? I mean, buffer overflows,
Well, yeah, it's got. I mean, not
cross-site
of any of the
scripting.
new ones. Like for example, there's none of the deserialization or any of those that are in there anymore. But whoa, why is my ETH0 down? But yeah, that did it. All right, there we go. But yeah, so I'm just going to show Cain and Abel real quick, unless anybody has any questions. I'm just going to do this real fast.
Yeah, I was curious. You said there'll be some interesting Wireshark signatures, so I'm
yeah. So okay, so now we're sniffing. My Mac is asking me to authenticate. There we go. Okay,
and we should see a bunch of unsolicited ARPs, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah. So we'll start off Cain here real quick.
It's a bunch of ARP replies, no ARP requests, and yet we'll see a ton of ARP replies.
Well, hopefully we don't. On this bad click. Hopefully we don't start doing that right now. Okay, so let's go there. Then we go to our sniffer tab. And I'm going to delete all these so you can kind of see. By the way, this is where I had changed the MAC addresses on a couple of mine, a couple of my NICs in this network before. So I think that's hilarious, Double D Electronics. But so if you ever wanted to change your MAC address to something funny, just use 000 Charlie 2022.
The first time we did this was like in the 90s when IBM gave out a bunch of token rings with the same MAC, and we thought it was cool to do it in hex words. And mine was feed dead beef. That was my MAC address.
That's dead beef, or that was always like the thing. I use that as a canary word in some of my code or whatever. But but the point is the first thing we do here is we just say scan MAC addresses, right? And so if we go and look after it runs this, we can go look in Wireshark and see what it actually did. And so that's where we see the sequential query of all those individual MAC addresses, right? So there was all these who has messages that went up through here, and you can see they're sequential, and only the ones that we get a response, which is that is at message, right? The only ones where I didn't see one yet. There. So these that we get these responses are the ones we know the hosts are up within our broadcast domain, right? So that basically shows that this one sent out this this question, and then it got this response back. And so now what it's doing is it's collecting those so that when we go back over here, it shows us here. Now we come down here to this APR one, and I'll remove these so we can do it again. Right. So then we hit this little plus sign, and then everything on the one on the left, whatever you choose on the left, is who you're going to be, basically what device you want to spoof as, who you're going to tell everybody you are, right? So while we're sitting here, let's look at this as well, just to show you. So if we go to ipconfig all, we can see the MAC address for this device is here, Echo Alpha 96, right? So that's what we're going to be looking for in our back in our Wireshark, right? So, but this is the side that we wanted to say who we are. Now, the other thing we want to look at here is what's the default router. So in this case, the default gateway is .2. So that's the one that you want to be if you want to get everybody to come to you as the default gateway, right? So we just put that one. And then the one on the right, these are the ones we want to poison. So these are the hosts that we want to actually try to get to bring their traffic to us. So I'll select those and hit OK. Okay. And so now you can see this is the IP address that we're going to say we are. This is the MAC addresses currently, and then this is the MAC address for each of these. So if we go and we hit this little nuclear button here, start saying poisoning, and if we slide back over and look at our Wireshark and zoom down here, we can see, go down here, oh, too much. We can see here that Wireshark actually captures it, shows it as a ARP poisoning because it says there's a duplicate use of the MAC address for all of these, right? And you could also see that under the statistics. You go down there to, or not under analyze, and under expert information, it'll also be listed here. So you'll see it in duplicate IP address configured here for .2. And so those are the kind of the quick places you can see this stuff in Wireshark that it's actually happening. But when we look down here, we can see that this is where it's actually doing more of the clear poisoning. So you can see now it's saying 254 is at, and it's giving this echo alpha MAC address. Right here, it's giving another echo alpha MAC address, so on and so forth. So it's basically saying all these hosts to each way. It's telling the router, hey, if you're talking to 254, that's me.
So you're
And
doing a man in the middle that was
right.
that was facilitated via ARP cache poisoning.
Right.
Awesome.
And so then if we go to, like, for example, go to a ClearText website, right, then any of the stuff that we send in here, so if we authenticate to this website, let me see if so if we authenticate to this website, for example, let's do test.test.com, password is test, right? So we sign in there, and then we go back and look at
Wireshark.
We go over here to passwords, and we've got HTTP here, and we look down the bottom, and there's the test.test.com with test being captured, right?
So Wireshark would have seen it, but this already had AIs that said extract that field and know that it was an FTP command.
Yeah, or HTTP. So this one are all FTPs, and then here's some SMBs, for example. And if it's got a hash like this one, you can actually just right-click and say send it to Cracker, and then it has a Cracker tab, and then you can come over here, and then you can select those, and then you can say, do a dictionary attack or brute force attack against it, and then you can load your own dictionaries. It even has a few rules, so you can do like as is, reverse, double as the password twice, lowercase, uppercase, submit numbers for various permanent values, so the 5s and S's and $signs all are interchangeable and stuff like that, right? Then they're saying also do case with perm, so go up and down with the cases as you're doing it. But anyway, you do the password cracking, and it tells you whether or not it cracks the hashes or whatever, and you would hit start, and it says 1 of 1 cracked because the password was blank, so it doesn't have a password in here. But either way, it cracks the password for you. And so that, like I said, but the coolest thing, this is the thing that I like most about Cain and Abel, is that it's very polite. When you stop the ARP poisoning and you go back and look at your Wireshark, you'll actually see that it cleans up its mess, which is, like I said, kind of cool, right? Because a lot of tools these days don't really do that for you. Right, so you can see that it went back out and sent the is that messages, all setting all of the MAC addresses back, so all the ARP caches are now accurate again. So that's like my favorite part, because, like I said,
that is cool. That is cool. That's very cool. That's part of the covering your tracks.
Yeah, and it doesn't help you clean up your mess after the fact. I mean, you run SQL map against the SQL server, it pollutes the hell out of a SQL server if it actually finds SQL injection, and then you're like, now you've got to do something with it. And it doesn't give you any way to like go clean it up,
That's nice.
So,
nice. Mike, thank you so much, guys. Any other questions for Mike? Everybody here this week, you're my 5th speaker, and everybody was so nice that you guys made time. I know many of you guys, like Tom, was getting phone calls constantly. I know you're all very busy, and just really appreciate it, Mike. How you guys holding up with the virus? How's your family doing?
Everybody's fine. I mean, we don't, there's been, I forget how many in my county or whatever, but they've obviously done all the shutdowns and, banned from going anywhere, but there's no ticketing. So that's awesome. So I'm not like,
are you staying home? Are you working from home?
Yeah. Working from home.
Now, any, say, I told you my issue sometimes is, I have 2 daughters, and one's in college, and she acted like it was the end of the world. It's the apocalypse. Then I have a 14-year-old who's acting like this is really stupid. I'm not going to get sick. And then I have mom who's doing her best. She's not freaking out, but she is probably maybe a little overly cautious. So I'll leave you with this joke. Maybe it'll make sense to you. But there was a husband. I'm making up a phony story here. Spread the word. There was a husband who was eating dinner with his family. Everything was going fine. He went to the bathroom. When he was done, he washed his hands, but it was only for 19 seconds. He didn't do the 20. When he came back, he infected everybody with corona. They all died. Terrible. So the lesson is make sure. Now, my wife keeps like doing it to my daughter. Every time my daughter sneezes, my wife's like watching TV. They're behind her. She goes, "Did you cover your face?" It's like, yes, it's just like we're all in the house together. We're not going to get it from the cat and give it to you.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I do think that it's crazy when like the park down the street from my house was had signs up saying that it was closed because of corona and everything, and people just removed the signs, and there were still like the park was full of kids and parents and stuff, and you're just like going, like, hey, survival of the fittest.
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm taking the extra courses. So the way I balanced with my daughter is I told the older one, I said, honey, it's not the end of the world. I'm sure this is going to be okay. We're going to get it. At the same time, why not wash our hands for 20 seconds? They're going to why not stay home? Would it kill you to stay home for a little bit? I mean, we'll watch
Well, I
movies.
think the people that work hourly is the ones that are hurting most, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not getting paid at all while they're sitting at home. Because my wife, she's a dental hygienist, right? But she's got paid hourly, and then now they closed her office for 2 weeks, and she's not getting paid at all, and so she doesn't like that. But I
No,
mean, if
no,
this is
no.
a
That part
salary,
stinks,
you
and I
can
feel
do
for it.
it.
Like I teach online, this has only helped me. But I
Mhm.
keep saying that I'm a big fan of automation and autonomous robotic stuff to replace the workforce, but we have to pay them. And so now's a great time. These Amazon delivery people should not be risking their lives. I would
Right,
rather see autonomous vehicles deliver this, but I don't want those people to go home and be out of work. So
right.
I really think we got to move to some UBI type.
Well, the best thing would be just unmanned vehicles, just like we use drones in Afghanistan, right? I mean, and we use robotics and things like that.
You
You can just
missed day one. We had what a guy here,
hey,
Seth Rao, really understands the drone technology, security. He's a big drone set guy, and the FAA sent out. We don't have a way to do license plates,
right,
so they've been customizing it. And at first, the RFP only came out like at the end of last year.
mhm,
And most of the people were doing symmetric authentication. And I was like,
right,
you got to be kidding me. These things are going to be so vulnerable to non-repudiation. And they want to know where a drone is at any given point, be able to remotely read it. And they modify the RFP to it has to be an active beacon. So it can't be just you passively query it as a police vehicle. You have to beacon out. You have to announce yourself. So they don't have a standard yet. There's
right.
times when it loses connectivity, and hopefully we can accelerate that. But yeah, we got to get drones out there delivering foods and delivering PPE and even doing testing. Like he was talking about, we should be able, through temperatures, fly through a community and identify homeless people that have it and help them.
Yeah, the favorite thing about this whole virus thing that cracks me up is that I've watched a few episodes that show doomsday preppers, and a few of them said that there's going to be a major virus outbreak that's going to shut down the world's economy. And they always, at the end of those episodes, they always say, like, what the likelihood of something like that happening is. And the little voiceover guy is always like, the chances of a viral outbreak that could cause a total collapse of the U.S. economy would be, and they basically say it was non-existent, right? It was like 7% or some ridiculously low value. Now you're sitting here looking at it going, all these doomsday preppers are probably going, told you that was going to happen, and now they're all sitting in their bunkers, and like just feeling like kings. So
I still, yeah, smoke test, guys. I still think that it's just better to be safe than sorry, but don't act like doomsday. So I'm not panicking, but my family did make fun of me when I bought gallon buckets of powdered drinks and powdered pea protein. And I said, look, it's
no,
not going to go bad. It's not going to hurt anybody.
you mean the vegetable peas, right?
It's powdered pea protein. Yes, vegetable PEA. Thank you for clearing that up. Yeah. I think it might have been you that showed me when you're looking for like malware Trojan wrappers, make sure you search malware Trojan wrapper, not just Trojan wrapper.
Yeah, that's the bad one to look for, right? All right, I got to go, man. But
Thank you so much, guys. All right, we're going to pause. Mike, again, thank you very much.
Yep.
Very awesome. Appreciate it.
Long and prosperous.
Oh, we could also do this too. Mike said you were a third-degree black belt last time.
Yeah.
Are you still third?
Yeah, third.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. Fantastic. All right, guys. Bye-bye.